Welcome back. It's time for our last review of the year. Hope you've all been nice and not naughty. And it's time for us to begin talking about reviewing for our final test. So, I believe that it is time for us to start sharing our screen and get us ready. So, here we go. This is what our final review sheet looks like. I think you're going to be enjoying it quite a bit. So what we're going to have to do with a lot of this information is to remember a lot of our formulas when we're talking about this. So at the beginning, I'd like to write a few of them down so you have them. We know when we're talking about finding our slope, we know that is our change in y over our change in x, which means we'll be subtracting our y's on the top and we'll be subtracting our x's on the bottom. Okay, easiest way for us to think about slope should be just fine. Now, the next thing that we're going to need to do when we look at something like this is to remember one of the forms of the equation of a line is our slope-intercept form. Very useful when we're going to be graphing. And this is something in the form of y equals mx plus b, where our m is our slope and our b is the y-intercept. And then the last form that we're going to be talking about, the one we're probably going to use the most, is our point-slope form. And so our point-slope form is y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. Everything else falls into one of these three things as we're going to be looking at it. So I want you to be prepared as we start to think about this with what we're going to do. So it is time for us to begin looking at our first problem. Finding the equation of a line with a slope of -4 and a y-intercept of 0, 1. If they give you a slope and a y-intercept, you have everything you need to use that slope-intercept form. So right now, we know that it's y equals mx plus b. We know our slope is 4. That is our m. So that's going to be a -4. We know our b is 0, 1. So that 1 right there, positive 1, is our b. So we're going to be doing a plus 1. And then the rest of the things just fall in. Our m was -4. So there is our x, -4x plus 1. And that y equals is where we're going to start. So the answer to this equation is y equals -4x plus 1. Fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Not too hard for us to be able to figure out because we know where they go. And if you're given information like this, it should be able to be helpful for you to do that. Now, the next part is asking you to write an equation in point-slope form. So we're going to be using that guy right there with the slope of -2 that passes through the point -3, 7. So let's write the formula again. Y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. So let's just take these one piece at a time. Right now, our slope is that -2 there. So this m is going to be -2. Okay, first thing is first. Now let's look at these other things one at a time. Right now, this right here, this first x, this is going to be my x1. Okay, so if my x1 is -3, that means I'm going to rewrite this one as a -3. And the other thing that we know right now is that this 7, that's my y1, because our points that we're dealing with are going to be sort of x1s and y1s. So 7 is my y, and the one that this one right here is going to be 7. Now, everything else just falls directly in. So y minus this is equal to -2, parentheses, x minus -3. Now, the one thing that I would do here, and I put parentheses around this -3, anytime you're subtracting a negative, I would probably simplify that, especially because on this test, it's going to be multiple choice. So to be able to see it will be helpful. So if we're going to be doing this, we will have y minus 7 is equal to -2 times the quantity x minus a negative becomes a positive, x plus 3. We're good to go. That's what we're going to be looking for. Fairly straightforward, fairly easy, but something you do need to pay attention to as you're going to be doing these problems. Now, this next one asks us to write an equation in slope-intercept form or point-slope form that passes through these points. Now, the easiest form is point-slope, but I am going to take us to the slope-intercept form as well, so you can see both, okay? So our first step here, they gave us 2 points. Well, if they give you 2 points, you have to have a slope to be able to find any of these things. So I'm going to have to use this equation here to find the slope of our line, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I'm going to come down here and let's do that. So first our slope m is going to equal, now I tend to subtract second minus first, but as long as you're consistent, it's fine. So 10 minus 4, that's our 2 y's being subtracted. 1 minus 3. Those are our two x's being subtracted. So on the top, I will have a 6. And on the bottom, I will have a negative 2. Now this can be reduced. 6 over negative 2 is going to reduce to the slope of negative 3. You're basically just dividing the two numbers and seeing what you get. Now at the end of this, if that's going to be our slope, we now have to choose one of these things to use to find the equation of the line in point slope form. All you really need to do is just pick one. 3, 4 is probably the easiest, so why don't we pick that as our point? And point slope form is what we'll start with. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Okay, so again, we know our negative 3 is our slope, so that'll be right here. Looking at the point 3, 4. 3 is our x, so that's going to be here. 4 is our y, so that's going to be here, and everything else just fills in. So y minus 4 equals negative 3 times x minus 3. We don't have anything to simplify in this one. This one had two negatives. We only have one negative. So right now, this is our point slope form. If we wanted to, we could be done. This is point slope form. But just to show you how to do this and put this in slope intercept form, what you're going to want to do to go to slope intercept form is just to simplify this. The first thing you're going to do is distribute that negative 3 to both things. So this will become negative 3x, and negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. So we will have y minus 4 is equal to that. And then if I want to move that 4 to the other side, I'm going to have to add 4 here and add 4 here. So I'm combining like terms. These will cross out, and we will get that y is equal to negative 3x plus 13. And that is the equation in slope intercept form. Now, said either one, clearly point slope form is easier. You can use whichever one that you would like, but do be clear you can do either one, and you don't have to choose one or the other. Okay, so now here's a problem that's like one of the ones we actually saw in our book. Which of the following is an equation of a line parallel to this that passes through this point? Okay, so let's take these in two pieces at a time. Parallel, what we remembered, when we have a parallel line, this has the same slope. Okay, so if I look at our original equation, my slope for this equation is equal to 3/4. So I am looking for an equation here that has a slope of 3/4. And I'm going to take care of that one. Let's take a look. Or excuse me. It is 3/4. The person that wrote these problems, did not make it so that it was 3/4. They made them so that they were 3/2 and 2/3. So here's what we're going to do. Let's change this to, oh gosh, I don't know. Let's go 2/3 because I think that's probably what our multiple choice problems had intended as we were looking at them. Clearly, Santa hasn't looked at these problems before going through them, so you're seeing this problem the first time as well. Ho, 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 ho. Now, let's look and see which one's going to work. We want slopes that are 2/3 if they're going to be parallel. These first two are definitely that. C and D would be if they were perpendicular. So we're going to cross both of those off because that's not going to work. Now, we need to find the point -8, 4. What I want to make sure you remember, and we've done this a couple times, when you use the point slope form, we're always subtracting. So whatever we have here, we're going to have the opposite of it next to it. So like here, the point was 3/4. We had -3 and -4. If it's -8, +4, we're going to have +8 and -4. So let's look for that one. This one has +8 and -4. This one has -8 and +4. This cannot be it. The answer has to be this one. Okay. So remember, if you're using point slope form, whatever point you have, the opposite of those things are going to be here. Because essentially what you're doing is saying, what would happen? What would I plug in here to make this 0? I plug in a -8 here to make it 0. I plug in a 4 here to make it 0. And that's what tends to happen. So that takes us through problem 4, even with the little mistakes that we had there from before. So I think we should be okay with that. Okay, 2 more problems and we're going to be done. Problem number 5, we're talking about being parallel and perpendicular. And so the thing that I want to make sure that we can remember about this is, what do we do with the slopes to know what's going to be parallel and perpendicular? And so let's just write this down. If we're talking about perpendicular have opposite reciprocal slopes. And I'm going to write that down. Because if they have opposite reciprocal slopes, that means that we're going to be looking at slopes that have fractions that are flipped, and we're going to be looking at them so that if one is positive, the other will be negative. If we're talking about parallel, we did just do this from the last problem. This means same slope, and that's pretty easy. If perhaps you were asked a problem like this in, I don't know, a constructing arguments problem or a critiquing the reasoning of others problem, when you're talking about it, what you should really look to try to speak to is that definition of what types of slopes they are. How would you know these things are perpendicular? How would you know that they're parallel? Has to do with the slopes, and make sure that you can actually define them using opposite reciprocal as your phrasing or your same slope as your phrasing. It would really help you, okay? So here, these are saying perpendicular. It doesn't really matter what format they're in. We know where the slopes are. So let's look for a second. Our two slopes that we're looking at, we've got that -3 there. So let's see, -3 is one of them. That'll be a slope. And the other one is that number right there, 1/3. Okay, well, let's think for a second. That's negative and that's positive, so that's definitely opposites. This is a 3 and this is a 1/3. If I put this as an over 1, which is what we do with a whole number, and I flip that fraction, it's 1/3, so that's reciprocal. These are perpendicular. That is a true statement. Okay, so that takes care of that one. Now let's just look for the other one to see if they are the same slopes as we go through it. So if we look, this is in slope-intercept form. My slope is right there, is 5/7. This is in point slope form. This is also 5/7. Since they have the same slope, doesn't matter what points they're going through, same slope means that they are parallel. So that is also true. Okay, the last problem that we have here is trying to write an equation in point slope form whose slope is -7 and which passes through this point. Now we've done this before, but it's a good practice to kind of take us through the last part of it. So as we do this, let's make sure that we can go. We have the equation is y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. Okay, so what I do want to point out with this one is the problems that we can run into. Almost never will you have the problem of saying what your slope is. This is -7, we're in good shape. The problem you run into is making sure that these 2 points go in the correct place, because this is an x and this is a y, even though on the left-hand side I have a y and on the right-hand side I have an x. So just remember that 2 that we have right there, that is my x, so that has to go where this one is. That's my 2. My -8, that's where my y is, so that has to go where my y is here. And it's important that we have both of those, because if we don't have them in the right place, then we're going to make a mistake. So this is y minus -8 is equal to m times x minus 2. So all of our points are there for the equation. The last thing that we have to do is simplify this one by doing the minus and negative and turning it to a +8, -7 times x minus 2. That is in point slope form. We know that the x is with the x, the y is with the y, and we have finished that. And that is the last problem that we're going to be going through for this. So guys, with that being said, I will stop sharing and say to you, that is going to be the last thing we're going through in the last video of the semester. So I wish you good luck on this final test and a Merry Christmas.